Today's lesson is all about the honey stage, and no, I don't mean actual delicious sugary honey for your tea or your oatmeal. I mean honey stage in our resin to get beautiful results like these dice that you see here. Remember this beauty from the spring? That's how we did it. And there are lots of questions circulating on the dice making subreddit about how to get your honey stage, which one is the fastest, what do I do? I'm going to break it down for you and show you how to figure it out and what to do. So first and foremost is to mix up some resin. It's the same simple, mix it up, start a timer to make sure you're mixing for a full 5 minutes. Why 5 minutes? Because 5 minutes is long enough to make sure that you've stirred everything together incredibly thoroughly. It forces you to scrape the sides at about the 3 to 4 minute mark because you're like, okay, I still got time. What am I going to do now? You're going to scrape the sides. You're going to scrape the bottom, and you're going to make sure that every ounce of part A and part B is thoroughly mixed together, and that is how we avoid soft cures. So now that everything is fully mixed here, and just let's, for shiggles, give it a good scrape around the sides again, because you never know. Scrapety scrape, scrape in the bottom there. Okay, we're good. Now I'm going to start the big timer here, and this is a count up timer, not a countdown timer. So it is running to tell me how long I've been doing something. And first, before we do anything else, we're going to check our resin directions. Now there's a lot of good stuff in here about pouring, cleanup, etc., but what we're really looking for is this. This is the chart of temperature and time. And for every temperature, there is a corresponding time. This is how long it is for your resin to cure, to fully cure, and what the corresponding temperature is for that amount of wait time. The colder you are, the longer it's going to take, the warmer, the faster. So we want to keep that on the warmer end. Now that we know that, we want to know how long our work time is. This says I've got about 25 minutes at 77 degrees, or at 25 minutes before it starts to gel, which means it starts to solidify at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's important to have a thermometer nearby so you know what the ambient temperature of your room is and what the general temperature that your resin is probably at or about at. So if it's a little colder, it's going to give you a little more than 25 minutes. If you're a little warmer, it's going to give you a little bit less time than 25 minutes, which is why we are running the timer below that. So now that we know our resin time is approximately 25 minutes according to the instructions, and we've been running for a little over 2 minutes here, 3 minutes now. I'm just going to fix these dice real quick. All I'm doing is coating them like blanks and popping them right back in the mold. We had some voids and some weird things happening, so if we just coat them and pop them back in, they'll be good as new. And that's all I'm doing there. If you want to see a full video on my process for that, or things that I do, do's and don'ts, things to look for, avoid, etc., let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to do one of those. So I've got this out of the way. We're about 6-7 minutes in. Oh, gotta reposition. And now I need clean gloves because that made a mess. Let's check our consistency. Still very runny. So what we're doing is running this timer and checking the consistency of our resin at certain intervals to see what is the thickness of the resin at 8 minutes. As you can see, 8 minutes in, this resin still super runny and still, yeah, there it is, super runny. So great for doing things like coating blanks, great for doing things like Petri. The thinner your Petri, or not your Petri, the thinner your resin is, the farther those tendrils go down into the resin for a Petri. Also, bonus effect, I don't know if you caught it there or you can catch it on the side here, you can see the bubbles rising from me stirring, so that was kind of fun. And now we are just speeding along on the time here. It's 13 minutes later. I don't know why I zoomed in that close, but as you could see, that resin, still very runny. So we're just gonna keep on waiting and waiting. Cue Jeopardy music. I'm not really gonna put Jeopardy music in here, that's copyrighted. But what I am gonna do at this point is mix up some colors for you. And now I was doing this during a commission that needed a specific green, so I was testing a lot of green colors, and I decided to do 2 greens that were very similar because there are a lot of dice that you can see out there, and just another test of the consistency there. There are a lot of dice questions on subreddit about how do I get this effect, and it's like beautiful gradients or swirls of colors. And so I wanted to use 2 colors that were very similar to show you what a sort of gradient effect would look like by using the honey stage. And then also what I'm going to do with that single cup on the side there is a dirty pour. And I'm really heavily coloring these because I want like maximum effect for my test purposes. So if you are like watching me put insane amounts of mica in here and screaming at the screen, don't worry, it's a test. Nobody's getting these dice if they don't cure. They're just going to sit around on my desk and look green and sparkly and pretty. And I actually am going to make some cores out of some of them, so the cores can go inside something. Nobody's going to touch it. Don't worry. Don't panic. And yes, if you're new to dice making, that is an excessive amount of mica powder. Don't do that unless you're testing like I'm doing here. So now we are 21 minutes in, and remember the work time on our sheet said about 25 minutes. And as you can see, it's a little thicker, but we can do better. So we're gonna keep on waiting. I'm gonna start pouring the other ones in a minute here, but just look at how it runs down the side of the cup. It's still moving pretty quickly. Not as quickly as at first, of course. We're 23 minutes in now. So we just wait a little bit longer. Let's see. Oh, that's much thicker. And that is getting much closer to what we're looking for honey stage. So if you remember the video of the actual honey that I had at the beginning of this, you saw how that moved and poured kind of thick. I actually prefer it a little thicker than like the way real honey runs. This here is probably about the thickness that I prefer. You can see it's kind of like resisting pouring out just a little bit. I might be pushing my boundaries a little bit. I bet I could probably run another, well, you'll see. I'm not going to spoil it. And then just a tip here, if you're using a split cup and you're having issues getting it out, you can just kind of give it a little channel. If there's already resin on the spout, it'll flow a little easier and it can help. Yeah, it still doesn't want to. It can help keep things pouring more evenly so that you don't get too much of one color first when you start to pour. So I'm going to pour these, and I'm going to do my best when I pour these are blanks, to not swirl it around. And nope, and I'm going to go swirling. Don't swirl, stop it. There we go, back and forth, back and forth. And what the back and forth motion does is it keeps the resin that I'm pouring split from one side to the other. So when we pull these out, you can see when I show you, which I will, I promise, the bottom of that D6, that the one is swirled and it's kind of like generic looking. They all look the same. And then I'll flip it over and you'll see the other side, this top here, is split pretty much right down the middle. And so I'm just gonna pour the rest of this. Oh, double checking. Let's see where we at with this one. Oh yeah, that's looking pretty honey. Or should I say pretty sweet? Yeah, it's looking pretty sweet. Like honey, which is what we're going for. So this is about the consistency that you really want when you are looking for your honey stage. It's still flowing. It's not dropping in heavy, thick droplets. It's thick, but not overly thick. And I guess I decided that that wasn't thick enough for me, but we're really pushing our boundaries here to see how long the resin, how long the resin is actually workable for. And that's the purpose of the timer, because what happens is companies want to make sure you can use your product. Just another check here. Look at that. Now, another thing to keep in mind, I will come back to the instructions in just a minute here, but another thing to keep in mind is that your colorants can change the density of your resin. And so it may flow a little easier. Like if you're putting alcohol inks in it, alcohol will thin it a little bit. Oh, and that was just the wipes that I've been wiping with. I thought I'd show you guys in case you were curious. Coincidentally, also have lots of alcohol, so they clean things up really nicely. And as I was saying, the colorants can change the thickness and viscosity of your resin. So it may run a little thinner if you're using an alcohol ink versus using a resin paste versus using mica powder. Each one is going to affect the viscosity and the way in which your resin flows like this a little bit differently. So back to the instructions. The instructions will give you a specified time. For example, this resin said 25 minutes. And as you can see, 32 minutes in, we are still pouring and it's still flowing super easily. Actually, I'm not working hard to get it out of the cups at all. And you'll see what I mean by working hard to get it out of the cups. Now I'm going to pour this one into these molds, and this is the dirty pour. So I want you to note here the thickness of the resin. See how it's starting to drop off, and rather than flow in a continuous drop, look how it runs down the side there. It's really quite thick. This is my favorite spot for honey stage. This is how I like my resin when I'm doing literally any of those designs that you saw in the beginning. That's how thick I like my resin for honey stage. Some people would be incredibly nervous at that thick. Some people would push it a little bit further. So it really just depends on your preference on how comfortable you are with letting it get thick. But that is also the purpose of running these time trials, is you know how far you can push it for certain. You have actual data backing up your decisions. And now here we are at about 40 minutes. That's almost double the time that the instruction said was workable, or my pot life. It's almost double my pot life for this resin. And as you can see now, it's really, really thick. We're like caramel instead of honey. And so it has to be like scraped out. And this D2 here, you'll see how I was able to actually keep it separated. It did not flow when I put that first batch in, the first color I scraped out to the one side. It just stayed there. It sort of filled in that half, and then pouring this other bit on top, it stayed on the other end and then flowed like over the top of it. So it didn't even like mix in the middle, and it kind of blurs the edges really nicely, and it's going to give you a really beautiful gradient. But this is a really dangerous spot to work, and you can see just how thick it is. It just drops off in a giant gloop and not in a runny, drippy droplet. So 41 minutes is the amount of time I can actually work with my resin. And this is why you want to run a time trial, because if you are looking for honey stage at just past the instruction time, you're going to be frustrated. You're going to wait 30 minutes and be like, okay, it's not even really that thick. Like, should I wait anymore? It's going to harden. I don't know what to do. By running these trials, you know. So I like to have about 10 minutes of work time before it reaches that thick, goopy caramel stage. So I'm going to reset this timer for 10 minutes less than the 40 minutes that we had. And those are the old times. They changed the formula of the resin, which is something else that you need to watch out for. If you are using a brand of resin and suddenly, like I have mine on auto order, so it auto ships me every so often when I need it, and they changed their formula. So it went like out of stock, and then suggested a new listing, which I realized then when I went to look at it, they had changed the resin formula a little bit. And so now it actually is faster than it used to be. That 40 minutes was based on the time trial of 50 minutes of actual work time that I had. And that was, again, another 20 minutes past the like 30 minutes I think it said I had as a pot life. So I am setting my resin work time for a little shorter than my honey stage timer. So that way I know if I'm working with a batch of resin and I'm doing some simple things like coating blanks or doing a Petri or just like a simple single color, I've got 25 minutes to do those, and then that'll be my 5-minute warning before I get to the 30 minutes of my honey stage, and then I will have 10 minutes left to work with the resin at honey stage before it turns into caramel, and I can't really do much with it. So we're going to put those in the pot, and voila, due to the magic of editing and you not having to wait, let's see what we pulled out. Now this first one here is false. That was just a wait. Just kidding. Now I'm just going to speed through the demolding of all of these and we'll take a look at them. And you're going to see this one that I demolded first here is the dirty pour. And it has that really, you can see the one sitting on the, oh, just kidding. First, let's look at this one. Look at the difference in the two sides, how one side is super green and the other is turquoise. All right, now let's look at the dirty pour. You can see that deep grain that was, or not green, grain, deep green vein of ink that I used. Actually, I think I used resin dye for the dirty pour, and how it's still in there, but it's really concentrated in certain areas. So now let's take a look at the blanks. I'm just gonna peel these, pop them out. Let's take a look at this little guy first because I really wanted to show you him first. So this is the bottom that I kind of swirled on a little bit. And then if we flip to the top here, you can see right down the middle how I had to wet it because it's dull from being the top. I don't bother sanding the tops. The one side is super sparkly and that teal, and the other side is a little bit light and more greener. So where I'm pointing is a little tealy, a little more tealy. It has that heavy sparkle, and the other side has the lighter sparkle and the different, it's more like a green teal versus a blue teal. And you'll be able to see that a lot more in some of these others. Like look at this what is this, the 12? 12, yes. You can really see like the green teal versus the blue teal. So there's the green teal. It's super apparent in person. And then flipping it back over, this is the more blue teal. Oh, nope, that's the green. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There we go. There's the more blue. So it's like a light blue and a green teal, and you can see how you can achieve some really beautiful gradient effects with this. This one's really apparent too. The top point is the super green teal with the heavy sparkle, and where I'm pointing is the lighter blue teal with the lighter sparkle. So this is really an excellent method for achieving these gradients or doing what's the word I'm looking for? Marbles. You can use similar color palettes to this and add like one accent of like a black or a like the dirty pour that I did with that green to achieve like a solid color marble that doesn't have like the black contrast. So it would be like all a green swirl, and actually that one, the green dirty pour, just pointing out more of the color shift here where you can see the blue teal versus the green teal. And actually with the dirty pour, it does kind of look like a marble. What's the word? Alexandrite. It looks like an alexandrite, which is like a form of quartz crystal, which if you didn't know, now you know. Okay, so now we're going to do it again, but we're going to do it with highly contrasting colors. So we have our data from the first test. We know how long our timers should be set. So we're going to mix this up. I'm going to use this neon orange or is that pink? No, I think it's actually supposed to be neon pink. And then this orange, there's the neon orange. Yes. So a little neon orange resin dye and pink resin dye. And I'm actually going to spike this with a little bit of white to try and brighten it up. Sometimes that color, that one in particular, is like transparent. So that's not what we want here. So we've got it all mixed up. We're just going to wait it out. No, we're not going to wait it out. Oh, yes, I did wait it out already. I skipped that part. I cut it out completely. I mixed it up. I waited it out. If you see the timer running down there, I have about 5 minutes left of the work time on this. So now I only filled this. Is this the... No, this is not it. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Forget what I just said. this is a full mold. And notice I'm making the back and forth stroke and not the swirling around stroke. So I'm just trying to scrape a little out of there because we don't want raised faces. I went a little overboard. And sometimes it'd be like that, you know? So just fixing my heavy hand. And scraping that excess that I scraped out of there into my dump mold. My dump mold is a jar, just FYI. I know a lot of people ask like, hey, what do you do with your extra resin? What kind of dump mold do you have? A lot of people have like skulls, or I've seen a lot of people use like the cat. I prefer a jar because then I can store stuff in it later. Okay, so now I have a little bit of resin left in these. It's probably enough to fill about halfway. So we're gonna fill these halfway, and I'm gonna utilize this to show you the difference between what a split pour will do with the honey stage versus waiting for this like a layer to fully cure and then add another layer on top of it. And if you're going to do this method where you have to pour in layers for some reason, you don't actually have to wait for it to fully cure. Oh, and then I added a little leftover clear. I forgot I had some of that too. So a little bit of clear. It's not totally full, not all the way. The 8 is actually mostly full there, but the rest of them are not. So we're going to do another layer on top of these to show you the difference between that split pour, the split pour at the honey stage and what honey stage will give you versus waiting for something to cure or mostly cure where it's pretty solidified and then you add another layer. So we put them in and we wait. And voila! And now it is the next day. Let's take a look at this D2. Look at the beautiful split on that. Now, see, the edges are still really like undefined, but let's jump real quick and take a look at these half cores. I'm only going to pull this one out so I can pop it back in the mold because he's the easiest, but you can see here really clearly how I had dumped that extra clear resin on top. That's very defined in there. There's the orange and the pink, and the colors aren't like muddied and mixed. You can see it's kind of like tie-dyed almost, that there is a separation of color, but it's not starkly separated. And so I'm going to pop that back in, and we're going to mix up some white resin here so that it's very apparent. I filled these bad boys up. We're going to pop them into the pressure pot for another 12-ish. That's the beauty of this resin. Cures in about 12. And then let's take a quick look over here while we wait for that at the full set. Or most of the set. Actually, I'm missing some footage. So you can see how the colors are separated and kind of mixed, but not extremely like muddied. And this 20 here is actually almost a good example of marbling. Not really the right colors, but you can see how the colors are pretty well distributed, but still defined with beautifully blurred edges, versus the second layer batch, we'll call it, where we did the one side at honey stage and the other side while it was completely cured as a second batch. So you can see again like that really pretty distribution and marbling versus the very stark line. So if you want very stark lines, you want to make sure you do it in multiple batches. If you're trying to do like stripes or something, if you're trying to do something that has defined colors but blended edges, you can do it in honey stage. And honey stage is actually how I do my galaxy dice. A lot of galaxy dice are done that way. So that's really all there is. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative so you can figure out what the honey stage is for your brand of resin and do cool stuff like that. And also, always remember to like, subscribe, and comment below to tell me what you thought or what you want to see next. I'll see you next time.